The sound of thunder rolling across the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1882 was enough to make even the bravest soul question their faith. But for Emma Hartford, huddled beneath a scraggly cottonwood tree with nothing but her torn calico dress and a broken wagon wheel 50 yards behind her, it felt like the very hand of God reaching down to punish her for every mistake she had ever made. The sky had turned from azure blue to an angry greenish black in less than 20 minutes, and the wind whipped her long chestnut hair around her face as she pressed herself against the rough bark, her whole body shaking with a fear so deep it seemed to come from her bones themselves. She had left Tucson 3 days ago with a family heading north to Flagstaff, but when the husband had started making advances that his wife pretended not to notice, Emma had insisted on being let out at the next town, except there was no next town, just endless stretches of desert dotted with sagebrush and the occasional Joshua tree reaching toward heaven like a penitent sinner. The lightning cracked so close that Emma could smell the sharp tang of electricity in the air, and she let out a small cry that was swallowed by the thunder that followed immediately after. Rain began to fall in fat, heavy drops that hit the dusty ground and created little explosions of dirt before the deluge truly began. Within seconds, Emma was soaked through, her dress clinging to her thin frame, her teeth chattering despite the warmth of the summer air. She had nowhere to go, no shelter, no horse, and the $17 she had sewn into the hem of her skirt would do her no good if she died out here alone. At 22 years old, she had already buried a husband, lost a baby, and fled from a brother-in-law who thought her inheritance should belong to him. And now it seemed the wilderness itself wanted to claim what little remained of her life. Through the sheets of rain, Emma saw a shape moving toward her, and her first instinct was to run, but her legs would not obey. The shape resolved itself into a man on horseback, and as he drew closer, she could see he was tall in the saddle, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that channeled water off its edges like a miniature waterfall, and a long canvas duster that flapped in the wind. He pulled his horse to a stop just a few feet from her tree, and dismounted in one smooth motion that spoke of years in the saddle. His face was shadowed by his hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble and eyes that even in the dim light seemed to hold a kindness that made her want to weep. "Ma'am, you cannot stay out here," he said, his voice deep and steady, cutting through the sound of the storm. "Lightning is dancing all around us, and this tree is the tallest thing for 100 yards. You are going to get struck if you do not move." Emma wanted to answer, wanted to tell him that she knew that she was not stupid, but her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "I have nowhere else to go," she managed, hating how weak she sounded. The cowboy did not hesitate. He moved toward her, and Emma flinched instinctively, but he held up one hand in a placating gesture. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is James Thornton, and I have a camp about a mile from here with a good overhang that will keep us dry. I am going to help you onto my horse, and we are going to ride there together. Is that all right with you?" Emma nodded, because what choice did she have? Death by lightning or trust a stranger? She had learned long ago that strangers could be more dangerous than storms, but something in this man's eyes made her want to believe he was different. James stepped closer, and she could smell horse and leather and something else, something clean like sage. He was taller than she had realized, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked strong but gentle as he reached for her. "I am going to lift you now," he said, giving her a moment to prepare before his hands closed around her waist and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. The world spun for a moment, and then she was sitting on his horse, a beautiful chestnut gelding with a white star on its forehead. James swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins, and suddenly, Emma was surrounded by warmth and strength and the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Hold on," he said softly. And then they were moving, the horse picking its way carefully through the increasing mud and the curtains of rain that made it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Emma found herself leaning back against James, drawing on his warmth and his solidity, and his arms tightened around her just enough to let her know he would not let her fall. The lightning continued to flash, great jagged bolts that turned the world white for an instant before plunging it back into darkness, and the thunder was a living thing that pressed against her eardrums and made her heart race with terror. "Almost there," James said, his breath warm against her ear, and Emma realized he was holding her even closer now. One arm wrapped firmly around her waist while the other hand guided the horse with practiced ease. She could feel him sheltering her body with his own, making himself the bigger target for the lightning that seemed determined to find them. No one had protected her like this since her father died when she was 16, and the feeling was so overwhelming that tears began to mix with the rain on her cheeks. True to his word, within a few minutes that felt like hours, they arrived at an outcropping of red rock that jutted out from a small hillside, creating a natural shelter that was deep enough to protect them and James's gear from the worst of the storm. He dismounted first and then reached up to help Emma down, and when her feet touched the ground, her legs nearly gave out. James caught her easily, steadying her with his hands on her shoulders. "Easy now," he said. "You are all right. You are safe, safe." The word echoed in Emma's mind like a prayer. She could not remember the last time she had felt truly safe. James guided her to sit on a flat rock beneath the overhang, and then he quickly unsaddled his horse and rubbed the animal down with practiced efficiency, before covering him with a blanket and tethering him where he could shelter as well. All the while, the storm raged just beyond their refuge, the lightning so frequent now that there were barely seconds between the flash and the thunder. Emma watched James move around the small space, his movements economical and sure. He pulled a bedroll from his pack and brought it to her. "You need to get out of that wet dress," he said, and when her eyes widened in alarm, he quickly added, "I will turn my back and keep watch outside. Wrap yourself in this. It is dry and will help you warm up." He did exactly as he promised, moving to stand at the very edge of their shelter with his back to her. His silhouette outlined each time the lightning flashed. Emma's fingers were so cold and stiff that she struggled with the buttons of her dress. But finally, she managed to peel the sodden fabric away from her skin. She wrung out her hair as best she could, and then wrapped herself in the bedroll, which smelled of wood smoke and leather and that same clean sage scent she had noticed on James. It was still warm from being packed against his gear, and she pulled it tight around herself, feeling the shaking in her limbs begin to ease. "I am decent," she said, and James turned around. Even in the dim light, she could see his eyes sweep over her, checking to make sure she was truly all right, but there was nothing improper in his gaze, only concern. "Better?" he asked, and Emma nodded. He moved closer and crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "You are going to be fine, but you are still shaking. That was quite a scare out there." "I thought I was going to die," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have never seen a storm like that come on so fast." "Arizona weather can turn on a dime in the summer," James said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and when she did not, he brushed a strand of wet hair back from her face. His fingers were calloused but gentle, and the touch sent a warmth through Emma that had nothing to do with the bedroll. "What were you doing out here alone?" "Where is your wagon, your people?" The concern in his voice made something in Emma's chest tighten. "I left them," she said. "Or rather, I made them let me out. The husband was not a good man, and I thought I could walk to the next town, but I did not realize how far it would be." James's jaw tightened. "You could have died out here. Between the heat, the lack of water, and storms like this, the desert does not forgive mistakes." "I know that now," Emma said, and despite her best efforts, her voice broke. The fear and exhaustion and the weight of the past months came crashing down on her all at once, and before she could stop herself, she was crying great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Without a word, James sat down beside her on the rock and pulled her against his chest, his strong arms wrapping around her and the bedroll both, holding her close as the storm continued to rage outside their shelter. "Go ahead and cry," he said softly, one hand coming up to stroke her wet hair. "You have been holding on to that for a while, I would wager. Let it out." So Emma did. She cried for her dead husband Thomas, who had been a good man but too weak to fight off the fever that took him. She cried for the baby she had lost 4 months into her pregnancy, just 2 weeks after Thomas died. She cried for her little house in Kansas that her brother-in-law had claimed, and for the life she had thought she would have that had disappeared like smoke. And James held her through all of it, his hand never stopping its gentle stroking of her hair, his presence solid and real and comforting in a way she had not known she needed. When the tears finally subsided, Emma realized the storm was beginning to ease. The lightning was moving off to the east, the flashes less frequent and the thunder a more distant rumble. She also realized she was plastered against a strange man's chest, and she pulled back abruptly, mortified. "I am so sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I do not usually fall apart like that with people I have just met." James smiled, and it transformed his whole face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. Emma realized he was probably only a few years older than she was, maybe 26 or 27. "No need to apologize," he said. "Sometimes a person just needs to let it out, and sometimes a storm is the right time to do it. Helps wash things clean." Emma found herself smiling back despite everything. That is a poetic way of looking at it. "My mother was a school teacher," James said with a slight shrug. "She made sure all her children could read and write and appreciate the world around them, even when that world was hard." "Was?" Emma asked softly, catching the past tense. "She passed 5 years ago," James said. "Cholera." "My father went 2 months later. Doc said it was his heart, but I think it was just broken. They were married 32 years and were still as in love as the day they met." "I am sorry," Emma said, and she meant it. "That must have been very hard." "It was, but I had my brother and sister to help share the grief." "What about you? Do you have family?" Emma shook her head. "Not anymore. My parents are both gone, and I was an only child. I had a husband, but he died last year. I have been on my own since then, trying to figure out where I belong." "And where do you think that is?" James asked. There was genuine curiosity in his voice, not judgment. "I do not know," Emma admitted. "I thought maybe California. I heard there are opportunities there for women who are willing to work hard. I can sew and cook and keep books. I thought maybe I could find a position in a hotel or a boarding house, something respectable that would let me make my own way." James nodded thoughtfully. "California is still a long way from here. Were you planning to walk the whole way?" When he put it like that, Emma realized how foolish her plan had been. "I suppose I had not thought it through very well," she said quietly. "I just knew I needed to leave Tucson before my brother-in-law found me. He was not willing to accept that the little bit Thomas left me was mine by right." "Some men do not think women should have property of their own," James said, and there was an edge to his voice that suggested he was not one of those men. "But the law is on your side if he tries to take what is legally yours." "The law is only as good as the men who enforce it," Emma said bitterly. "And in Tucson, those men were friends of my brother-in-law. I had no chance of keeping what was mine, not without a fight that would have cost me more than the money was worth." The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the west where the storm had passed. James stood and walked to the edge of their shelter, looking out at the desert that was already beginning to steam in the returning heat. "Sun will be setting in a few hours," he said. "We should stay here for the night. The ground is going to be muddy, and it is not safe to travel in the dark anyway. In the morning, I will take you into Red Creek. It is about 10 miles north of here. There is a boarding house there run by a widow named Mrs. Peterson. She is a good woman, fair and honest. Maybe she could use some help, and even if not, she can point you toward someone who can." Emma felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought fresh tears to her eyes. "You would do that for me. You do not even know me." James turned to look at her, and in the fading light of the storm, his eyes were serious. "I know you were brave enough to leave a bad situation even though you did not have a solid plan. I know you would rather take your chances in the desert than stay somewhere you were not safe." "That tells me plenty about your character, Miss Hartford," Emma said. "Emma Hartford, Miss Hartford," James said with a slight nod. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance even under such unusual circumstances." Despite everything, Emma laughed. That is certainly one way to describe being rescued from a thunderstorm. As the evening progressed, James proved to be not only a gentleman but also surprisingly good company. He built a small fire just inside the shelter once the rain stopped completely, using dry wood he had kept wrapped in oilcloth in his pack. He made coffee in a battered tin pot and shared his provisions with Emma, strips of dried beef and hard biscuits that tasted like a feast after the day she had endured. He told her about his work as a horse wrangler, traveling from ranch to ranch across Arizona and New Mexico, breaking and training horses for wealthy ranchers who needed good mounts for their cattle operations. "I have always had a way with horses," he said, staring into the fire. "Even as a boy, I could calm the most fractious colt or the most spooked mare. My father used to say I was part horse myself, the way I understood them." "Do you ever want to settle down?" Emma asked. "Have your own ranch instead of always traveling?" James was quiet for a moment, and Emma worried she had overstepped, but then he said, "I do. I have been saving for years now, and I am close to having enough to buy a piece of land up near Prescott. Good grazing, plenty of water from the creek that runs through it. I have my eye on 200 acres that belong to an old-timer who is ready to retire. He has said he will hold it for me until the end of the year, give me time to get the rest of the money together." "That sounds wonderful," Emma said, and she could hear the wistfulness in her own voice. "A place of your own where you can put down roots and build something lasting. Is that what you want?" James asked, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "Roots and something lasting, more than anything," Emma admitted. "I have been drifting since Thomas died, and before that, I was just following where he led. I loved him and he was good to me, but I never felt like I had a say in where we went or what we did. I want to find a place where I belong, where I can be more than just someone's wife or daughter or sister-in-law. I want to be Emma, whoever that turns out to be," James smiled. "I think that is the wisest thing I have heard anyone say in a long while." They talked late into the night, and Emma was surprised by how easy it was to open up to this man she had just met. Maybe it was because he had held her through the storm, both the one in the sky and the one in her heart. Maybe it was because he listened without judgment, his questions thoughtful and his responses genuine. Or maybe it was simply that after months of being alone and afraid, she had finally found someone who made her feel safe. When Emma's eyes began to droop, James insisted she take the bedroll and sleep while he kept watch. "I am used to sleeping rough," he said when she protested, "and I would rest easier knowing you were comfortable. Please, Miss Hartford, let me do this for you." Emma was too tired to argue. She lay down on the smooth stone floor of the shelter, wrapped in the bedroll that still smelled like James, and fell asleep almost instantly. She did not see James watch her for a long moment, his expression soft, before he turned back to tend the fire and keep guard through the night. Emma woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back, the storm, the terror, and James. She sat up, clutching the bedroll to her chest, and saw him crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast in a small skillet. Her dress was draped over a rock near the fire, nearly dry. "Good morning," James said, glancing over at her with a smile. "I hope you do not mind, but I took the liberty of setting your dress by the fire to dry. I did not look," he added quickly. "I just grabbed it from where you had left it and moved it closer to the heat." "Thank you," Emma said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That was very kind of you." "Breakfast is almost ready," James said. "I figured we should eat well before we head to Red Creek. It is not a hard ride, but better to travel on a full stomach." After they ate and Emma had dressed in her now-dry calico, they packed up James's camp and prepared to leave. The morning was already hot, the storm a distant memory except for the damp ground and the puddles that dotted the landscape. James helped Emma onto his horse again, and she found herself settling against him as naturally as if they had been riding together for years. The ride to Red Creek took them through some of the most beautiful country Emma had ever seen. Red rock formations rose up from the desert floor like ancient cathedrals, and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. James pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area, his voice a pleasant rumble against her back. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months, maybe years. There was something about being with James that made the world seem less frightening, more full of possibility. Red Creek turned out to be a small but tidy town nestled in a valley between two mesas. There was a main street with a general store, a saloon, a smithy, and several other businesses, along with a white-painted church at one end and a schoolhouse at the other. James guided his horse to a large two-story house on a quiet side street, with a sign out front that read, "Peterson's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Fair Rates. Mrs. Peterson turned out to be a formidable woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She stood on her front porch with her arms crossed as James and Emma rode up, but her expression softened when she recognized James. "James Thornton," she said, her voice warm. "I had heard you were back in the area, and who is this you have brought me?" James dismounted and helped Emma down before turning to face Mrs. Peterson. "This is Miss Emma Hartford. She had some trouble on the road from Tucson and needs a safe place to stay. I was hoping you might have a room available and perhaps some work if she is interested." Mrs. Peterson's keen eyes swept over Emma, taking in her rumpled dress, her wind-tangled hair, and the wary hope in her eyes. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded briskly. "I always have room for someone in need, and as it happens, I could use another pair of hands around here. My regular girl just got married and moved to Phoenix with her new husband." "Come inside, Miss Hartford, and we will talk terms." Emma glanced at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much his kindness had meant to her, but Mrs. Peterson was already beckoning her inside. "Go on," James said softly. "You will be safe here, Mrs. Peterson is one of the good ones." "Will I see you again?" Emma asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment, but James's expression was pleased. "I will be in town for a few days," he said. "I have some business with the blacksmith and need to pick up supplies. Maybe I could call on you tomorrow, see how you are settling in." "I would like that," Emma said, and she meant it more than she could express. Mrs. Peterson turned out to be exactly what James had promised, fair and honest. She offered Emma room and board plus a small wage in exchange for help with the cooking, cleaning, and managing the boarding house. "I have 6 rooms besides my own," she explained as she showed Emma around the neat, comfortable house. "Right now, I have 4 of them rented to regulars. A clerk from the general store, the new schoolteacher, a prospector who is trying his luck in the hills, and a retired cavalry sergeant. The other 2 are for travelers passing through. It is not hard work, but it is steady, and I expect honesty and reliability from anyone who works for me." "You will have both," Emma promised. "I appreciate the chance, Mrs. Peterson, more than I can say." The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I have a sense about people, and James Thornton is not the kind of man to bring trouble to my door. If he vouched for you, that is good enough for me. Now let me show you to your room. It is small but private, and you can lock the door from the inside." A woman should always be able to lock her door. Emma's room turned out to be a cozy space on the 2nd floor with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. It was simple but clean, and after months of uncertainty, it felt like a palace. Mrs. Peterson left her to settle in, and Emma sank down onto the bed, hardly able to believe her good fortune. Just yesterday, she had been alone and terrified in a thunderstorm, certain she was going to die. Now she had a roof over her head, honest work, and the promise of seeing James again tomorrow. The thought of James made her heart beat a little faster. She barely knew him, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before, not even with Thomas, and she had loved Thomas. But what she felt when she was near James was different, more intense, like a current running beneath the surface of everything, waiting to sweep her away. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Emma spent the rest of the day learning the routines of the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson was a patient teacher, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the preferences of the regular boarders. The school teacher, a shy young woman named Anne, was especially friendly, and Emma thought they might become friends in time. By evening, Emma was exhausted but satisfied. She had earned her keep today, and she had done good work. The next morning, Emma woke early and helped Mrs. Peterson prepare breakfast for the boarders. She was just clearing the dishes when there was a knock at the front door. Her heart leaped, and she had to force herself not to run to answer it. Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look, but said nothing as Emma smoothed her apron and went to the door. James stood on the porch, hat in hand, his dark hair still damp from a recent washing. He had shaved, revealing a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily. He was wearing clean clothes, and Emma thought she had never seen a more handsome man in her life. "Good morning, Miss Hartford," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at her. "I hope I am not calling too early. I wanted to see how you were settling in." "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," Emma said, suddenly shy. "And no, you are not too early. I have been up for hours helping with breakfast." "Mrs. Peterson is already putting you to work then," James said with a chuckle. "That is a good sign. She would not bother if she did not think you would stay." "I plan to," Emma said. "This is exactly what I needed. Thank you again for bringing me here." "It was my pleasure," James said, and the way he looked at her made Emma's pulse quicken. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk with me. I could show you around town, introduce you to a few people. It helps to know your neighbors in a small place like this." Emma glanced back toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Peterson was pointedly not watching them. "Let me just ask Mrs. Peterson if she can spare me for a bit." The older woman waved her away with a smile. "Go on, girl. You worked hard yesterday and this morning. You have earned a break. Just be back in time to help with the midday meal." So Emma found herself walking down the main street of Red Creek with James by her side, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He introduced her to the owner of the general store, a jovial man named Mr. Henderson, who promised to extend her credit if she ever needed it. They stopped by the smithy, where James checked on a piece of tack he had ordered, and the blacksmith, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, greeted James like an old friend and welcomed Emma to town. Everywhere they went, people seemed to know and respect James, and by extension, they were kind to Emma. "You have a lot of friends here," Emma observed as they walked toward the edge of town, where a small creek burbled over smooth stones. "I have been coming through Red Creek for years," James said. "It is one of my regular stops when I am working this part of the territory. The people here are good and they take care of their own. You will fit in, I think." They sat on a fallen log by the creek, watching the water flow past. It was peaceful here, with the sound of the creek and the whisper of the wind through the cottonwood trees. Emma found herself relaxing, her shoulders dropping from around her ears where she had been holding them tense for so long. "Can I ask you something?" James said after a while, his voice quiet. "Of course," Emma said. "Why did you really leave Tucson? I know you said your brother-in-law was trying to take your inheritance, but that does not explain why you left with nothing but the clothes on your back. There is more to it, is there not?" Emma was silent for a moment, debating how much to tell him, but James had been nothing but kind and honest with her, and she owed him the same courtesy. "He wanted more than just my money," she said quietly. "He thought that since I was his brother's widow, I should be grateful for his attention. When I made it clear I was not interested, he became angry. He started showing up at all hours, saying things about how I could not survive on my own, how I needed a man to take care of me. He never actually hurt me, but I could see it in his eyes that he wanted to. So I left before he could. James's jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists. If I ever meet this man, it will take considerable restraint not to teach him how a real man treats a woman. I appreciate the sentiment, Emma said with a small smile, but I just want to forget about him and move on with my life. Being here, starting fresh, it feels like a second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance, James said. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. And for what it is worth, I am glad you are here. I know we just met, but I feel like I have known you much longer. Is that strange? No, Emma said softly, her fingers curling around his. I feel the same way. When you held me during the storm, I felt safer than I have in years, maybe ever. They sat there for a long time, hands clasped, watching the creek flow by. It was the beginning of something. Emma could feel it in her bones. And for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of what the future might hold. Over the following weeks, James found reasons to stay in Red Creek. He told Emma he had more work in the area than he had expected, and while that was true, they both knew the real reason he was lingering. He called on Emma every day, sometimes taking her for walks, sometimes just sitting in Mrs. Peterson's parlor and talking for hours. Emma learned that James loved to read, that his favorite meal was his mother's apple pie, and that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a horse that had thrown him when he was 16. James learned that Emma had always wanted to learn to play the piano, that she was terrified of snakes but loved thunderstorms now because they reminded her of the night they met, and that she laughed like music when something truly delighted her, Mrs. Peterson watched their courtship with approval, occasionally offering Emma advice that was both practical and surprisingly romantic. "That man is smitten with you," she said one evening as they washed dishes together. "And unless I miss my guess, you feel the same way about him." Emma felt her cheeks warm, but she did not deny it. "I do," she admitted. "But it scares me, Mrs. Peterson. I cared for Thomas, but what I feel for James is so much stronger. It is like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you are about to jump but not sure if there is water below or rocks." "Love is always a risk," Mrs. Peterson said gently. "But from what I have seen, James Thornton is a good man. He is honest, hardworking, and he treats you like you are precious. Those are rare qualities, Emma. Do not let fear keep you from something that could be wonderful." A few days later, James invited Emma to accompany him on a ride out to see the property he wanted to buy near Prescott. "It is about 2 hours from here," he said, "but I would like you to see it, to tell me what you think. Your opinion matters to me." Emma agreed, and early on a Sunday morning when she had the day off, they set out together. James had borrowed a gentle mare for Emma to ride, and though it had been years since she had been on a horse, she found the rhythm coming back to her quickly. The ride was beautiful, taking them through landscapes that ranged from desert scrub to rolling hills covered in grass and wildflowers. James was an easy companion, pointing out wildlife and sharing stories from his years on the trail. When they crested a final hill, James stopped and pointed. "There," he said, "that is the land I want to buy." Emma looked and felt her breath catch. The property spread out below them was stunning. A clear creek meandered through the center of the valley, lined with cottonwood and willow trees. The grass was lush and green despite the summer heat, and in the distance, she could see the rocky peaks of mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. There was a small cabin near the creek, weathered but sturdy-looking, with a barn and a corral that needed some repair but was fundamentally sound. "Oh, James," Emma breathed. "It is beautiful." James's face lit up with pleasure at her reaction. "I thought you would like it. The creek never runs dry, even in the worst years. The grass is good for grazing, and there is enough timber on the higher elevations to build whatever I need. The old man who owns it now has agreed to sell it to me for $800. I have $600 saved, and I should have the rest by the end of October if my current contracts come through." They rode down into the valley, and James showed Emma around. He walked her through the cabin, which was small but well-built, with a good stone fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. He pointed out where he would expand the barn and add more corrals. He showed her a spot near a grove of aspens where his mother would have loved to plant a garden. And with every word, every gesture, Emma could see the dream taking shape in his mind. "You will make this place into something wonderful," Emma said as they stood on the porch of the cabin, looking out over the valley. "I hope to," James said. Then he turned to her, his expression serious. "Emma, I need to tell you something. I did not bring you here just to show you the property. I brought you here because I cannot imagine building a life here without you in it." Emma's heart began to pound. "James." "I know it has only been a few weeks," he continued, "and I know this is fast, but I cannot deny what I feel. From the moment I found you in that storm, something in my heart recognized you. You are brave and strong and kind, and when I think about the future, all I can see is you by my side. I love you, Emma Hartford. I think I started loving you when you looked up at me through the rain with those beautiful eyes and trusted me enough to let me help you." Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again, not after losing Thomas. But what I feel for you is different, James. It is bigger and brighter and more real than anything I have ever known. When you held me during that storm, something in me knew I was home, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. You are my home." James closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Emma said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper as she melted against him. It was like lightning, but the the kind that illuminated everything and made the world brighter. Emma wrapped her arms around James's neck and kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy that was bubbling up inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I should wait, should court you properly for months and ask for permission from someone, but I do not want to wait. I want to build this life with you, Emma. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and spend every evening watching the sunset from this porch with your hand in mine. Please say yes." "Yes," Emma said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, James, I will marry you, 1,000 times yes." They were married 4 weeks later in the little white church in Red Creek with Mrs. Peterson standing up as Emma's matron of honor and the blacksmith serving as James's best man. Emma wore a simple dress of pale blue that Anne, the schoolteacher, had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that James had picked for her that morning. The church was packed with the townspeople who had already come to care for Emma and who had known James for years. When James lifted her veil and kissed her as his wife, the congregation erupted in applause, and Emma felt like her heart might burst from happiness. James had saved enough money to buy the property by the end of September, just as he had hoped. They spent the month of October moving their few possessions from Red Creek to their new home, which Emma had already started calling Thornton Valley in her mind. James worked from dawn until dusk repairing the barn and the corrals, and Emma threw herself into making the cabin into a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a small herb garden near the back door, and spent hours scrubbing and cleaning until every surface shone. On their first night in their new home, James built a fire in the stone fireplace and spread blankets on the floor in front of it. They lay together in the flickering light, James's arms wrapped around Emma as they talked about their plans for the future. "I want to breed the best horses in the territory," James said, his hand gently stroking Emma's hair. "Not just good-working horses, but animals with real spirit and intelligence, the kind of horses that become partners to their riders, not just tools." "You will do it," Emma said with confidence. "You have a gift with animals, I have seen it." "And what about you?" James asked. "What do you want, Emma? Besides being here with me, I mean," Emma thought for a moment. "I want to build a family with you," she said slowly. "I want children running through this valley, learning to ride and growing up strong and free. I want to grow old with you, James, and know that we built something lasting together, something that will outlive us both. We will have all of that, James promised, pulling her closer. I swear it to you. Their first year of marriage was not easy. The work was hard and the hours long. James traveled occasionally to fulfill contracts he had made before they married, and Emma missed him desperately when he was gone, even though he was never away for more than a week at a time. Money was tight as they invested everything they had into building up the ranch. There were setbacks. A mare they had bought turned out to be too old to breed. A winter storm damaged part of the barn roof, and a drought in the spring meant they had to carefully ration water for their small herd. But through it all, Emma and James grew closer. They learned to work as a team, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other through the challenges. On the hard days, when everything seemed to go wrong, they would sit together on the porch at sunset, and James would pull Emma into his arms just like he had during that thunderstorm so many months ago, and she would feel safe and loved and certain that they could weather anything together. In the spring of 1884, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to see his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Emma said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy." James set her down gently and cradled her face in his hands. "Emma, I did not think I could love you more than I already did, but knowing you are carrying our child, knowing we created a life together, it makes me love you even more. You are everything to me. Everything." James was ridiculously protective during Emma's pregnancy. He insisted she not overwork herself, taking on more of the heavy chores and hiring a young man from Red Creek to help with the ranch work so Emma could rest. Emma protested that she was pregnant, not fragile, but secretly she loved how much James cared. He would sit with her every evening with his hand on her growing belly, talking to the baby and telling stories about what their life would be like. Mrs. Peterson came to stay with them as Emma's time drew near, and Emma was grateful for the older woman's presence and experience. When the labor pains started on a warm October morning, James paced the porch like a caged mountain lion, while Mrs. Peterson calmly coached Emma through the long hours of bringing their child into the world. Their son was born just as the sun was setting, his first cries strong and healthy. Mrs. Peterson wrapped him in a soft blanket and placed him in Emma's arms, and Emma stared down at the tiny, perfect face with awe. James came into the room, his face pale and his hands shaking, and when he saw Emma holding their baby, he broke down and cried. "He is perfect," James said, kneeling by the bed and gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "You are perfect. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel after James's father, and from the moment he entered their lives, everything revolved around him. James was a devoted father, walking the floor with Daniel when he cried at night, making silly faces to get him to smile, and proudly showing him off to anyone who visited. Emma had never seen her strong, capable husband so utterly undone by such a tiny person, and it made her love him even more. 2 years later, their daughter Sarah was born, and their family felt complete. Sarah had Emma's chestnut hair and James's dark eyes, and she was just as stubborn as both her parents combined. Daniel adored his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and watching the two of them together made Emma's heart swell. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. James's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the territory, and people came from as far as Tucson and Albuquerque to buy horses from him. They built a larger barn and added on to the cabin, creating more bedrooms for the children and a proper parlor where Emma could entertain the neighbors who had become friends. On a warm summer evening in 1887, Emma stood on the porch watching James teach Daniel how to ride. Sarah was napping inside, and Emma had a few precious moments to herself. She thought about the terrified young woman who had huddled beneath a cottonwood tree during a thunderstorm 5 years ago, certain she was going to die alone in the desert. That Emma had been lost and afraid, with no idea where she belonged or what her future held. Now, watching her husband and son, with her daughters sleeping safely inside the home they had built together, Emma knew exactly where she belonged. She belonged here in this valley with this man and these children. She belonged in the life they had created from nothing but hard work, love, and a chance meeting during a storm. James looked up and caught her watching. He grinned and waved, and Emma waved back, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet except for the gentle sounds of the horses in the barn, Emma and James sat together on their porch, watching the stars come out in the vast Arizona sky. "You remember the night we met?" James asked, his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Of course," Emma said. "How could I forget? You saved my life." "I think maybe you saved mine too," James said thoughtfully. "Before I found you, I was drifting. I had plans, sure, but I did not have a reason, not really. You gave me that reason, Emma. You made all of this mean something." Emma turned to look at him, seeing the same love in his eyes that had been there since the beginning. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together." "We did," James agreed. He pulled her closer and Emma rested her head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. Thunder rumbled in the distance and Emma smiled, remembering. "Sounds like a storm is coming," James observed. "I am not afraid of storms anymore," Emma said. "Storms brought you to me." They sat together as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, watching the lightning dance across the sky, safe and warm and loved. The storm passed, as storms always do, but what James and Emma had built together would last forever. The years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of a life well lived. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who shared his father's gift with horses. By the time he was 15, he could break a green horse as well as James could. And together, they made Thornton Valley one of the most respected horse ranches in the territory. Sarah inherited her mother's determination and her father's fearlessness, and she could outride and outshoot most of the boys in the county, much to Emma's amusement and occasional concern. In 1892, Emma discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise after 8 years. James was thrilled, though Emma felt exhausted at the prospect of chasing after a baby at 32 when she also had a ranch to help run and 2 older children to manage. But when their second son, William, was born in the spring of 1893, Emma fell in love all over again. William was quieter than Daniel had been, more thoughtful, with a gentle nature that reminded Emma of her own father. The turn of the century brought changes to Arizona. The territory was growing more settled, with railroads connecting the towns and more families moving in to farm and ranch. Red Creek grew from a small settlement into a proper town with a bank, a hotel, and even a weekly newspaper. But Thornton Valley remained a constant, a place where hard work and family values mattered more than the rush toward progress. In 1903, Daniel married a sweet girl named Lucy from Red Creek, and they built a small house on the eastern edge of the property. James deeded them 50 acres as a wedding present, and Daniel started his own herd with horses he had bred and trained himself. Emma cried at the wedding, but they were happy tears. Her son had found a good woman, and they would build their own life while still being part of the family ranch. Sarah proved more difficult to marry off, not because she was not pretty or accomplished, but because she had high standards and refused to settle for any man who did not treat her as an equal. "I want what you and Papa have," she told Emma one evening when she was 21 and Mrs. Peterson, who visited frequently even in her advanced age, had been hinting about grandchildren. "I want a man who will love me for who I am, not who he thinks I should be. I would rather be alone than be with the wrong person." "Then you wait for the right one," Emma said firmly. Do not let anyone pressure you into something that does not feel right. When you know, you will know. Sarah did eventually find her match in a young veterinarian who moved to Red Creek in 1905. Dr. Michael Bennett was intelligent, kind, and completely unintimidated by Sarah's fierce independence. He appreciated her skill with animals and her sharp mind, and he made her laugh in a way Emma had rarely seen. They married in 1906, and Michael joined the ranch, working alongside James and Daniel to keep the horses healthy and helping Emma establish a small cattle operation to diversify their income. William, the baby of the family, turned out to have a talent for figures and business. He went to school in Prescott and learned accounting, and when he returned to the ranch at 18, he took over managing the financial side of the operation. Under his guidance, Thornton Valley became even more profitable, and James was able to buy additional land from neighbors who were retiring or moving on. In 1910, Emma and James celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces earned from years of hard work and laughter in the Arizona sun. They had 6 grandchildren between Daniel and Sarah, with another on the way, and the ranch was thriving. On the evening of their anniversary, James took Emma back to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. The cabin where they had started their married life was now used for storage, but it still stood sturdy and strong. James had packed a picnic, and they sat on the porch of the old cabin, eating and talking and remembering. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Marrying a drifter and settling for this hard life instead of finding something easier in a city somewhere?" Emma looked at him in astonishment. "Regret it, James Thornton, this has been the best life I could have possibly imagined. You gave me a home, a family, and a love that has only grown stronger with time. I would not change a single moment." "Not even the bad times?" James asked. "The years when money was tight, or when the drought hit, or when Daniel broke his arm and we did not know if it would heal right. Not even those," Emma said firmly. "The bad times made the good times sweeter and we got through them together. That is what matters. We have always been a team, you and I." James pulled her close and kissed her, and even after nearly 3 decades, the touch of his lips still made Emma's heart race. "I found you in a thunderstorm," he murmured against her hair, shaking and afraid and trying so hard to be brave. "And you let me hold you until the lightning passed. I did not know it then, but that was the moment my real life began." "Mine too," Emma said. "You gave me shelter from the storm, James, and you have been my shelter ever since. I love you. I will always love you." They stayed there until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms. 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most and built a life that was richer and fuller than either had dared to dream. As Emma moved into her 60s, she slowed down a bit, letting her children and their spouses take on more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. She spent her time tending a large garden, teaching her grandchildren to read and do arithmetic, and writing letters to Mrs. Peterson, who had finally retired from running the boarding house and moved in with her daughter in Phoenix. Emma treasured those letters, the connection to the woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. James, too, began to step back from the hardest physical work, though he never stopped working with the horses he loved. He spent hours in the corrals with his grandchildren, teaching them what he had learned over a lifetime, and Emma would watch from the kitchen window with a full heart. On a summer evening in 1918, when Emma was 58 and James was 62, a thunderstorm rolled through the valley. It was the kind of storm that Emma had once feared, with lightning that split the sky and thunder that shook the windows. But now, sitting in the parlor of the home they had expanded and improved over the decades, surrounded by photographs of their children and grandchildren, Emma felt nothing but gratitude. James came to sit beside her on the settee, and she leaned into him just as she had done so many times before. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and Emma smiled. "Still not afraid of storms?" he asked, his voice teasing. "Not when you are holding me," Emma said. I never have been." They sat together as the storm raged outside, and Emma thought about all the storms they had weathered together over the years. The literal ones and the metaphorical ones, the challenges and the heartaches and the triumphs. Through it all, James had been her constant, her shelter, her home. "I would do it all again," Emma said suddenly. "If I had the choice, I would do every single moment again exactly the same way." James kissed the top of her head. "So would I, my love, so would I." The storm passed, as storms always do, and the next morning dawned clear and bright. Emma and James stood on their porch, hands clasped, watching their grandchildren play in the puddles left by the rain. Daniel and Lucy's children were there, and Sarah and Michael's, and even William had recently married and was expecting his first child. "We did well," James said quietly, surveying the scene before them. "We built something good here, Emma, something that will last long after we are gone." "We did," Emma agreed, "and it all started with a thunderstorm." Emma lived to see her children's children have children of their own, and James was by her side through every milestone. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, surrounded by 4 generations of Thorntons, and Emma looked at the sprawling family that had come from 2 lonely people finding each other in a storm and felt overwhelmed with joy. When James died peacefully in his sleep in 1935 at the age of 79, Emma grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart. He had given her so many years of love and happiness, and she carried that with her like a light in the darkness. She lived another 5 years, remaining sharp and engaged with her family until the very end. When she passed in 1940 at the age of 80, she was surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren, and her last words were, "Tell your grandfather I am coming home." They buried Emma next to James on a hillside overlooking Thornton Valley, where they could watch over the land and the family they had built together. Their children made sure the graves were always tended, with fresh flowers in the summer and wreaths in the winter. And on stormy nights, when the lightning danced across the Arizona sky and the thunder rumbled through the valley, the Thornton descendants would tell the story of how it all began. With a cowboy who found a woman trembling in a thunderstorm and held her close until the lightning passed away, and in doing so, found the love that would define generations to come. The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of Daniel and his sons, and then their sons after them. The Thornton name became synonymous with quality horses and honest dealing throughout Arizona and beyond. But more than that, the family carried forward the values that Emma and James had instilled: hard work, integrity, loyalty, and above all, the importance of family and the enduring power of love. In the main house, which had been expanded and modernized over the years, but still retained the core structure of the original cabin, there hung a large portrait of Emma and James, painted from a photograph taken on their 25th anniversary. In the painting, James's arm was around Emma's shoulders, and both of them were smiling, their eyes full of the love and contentment that had marked their marriage. Every new member of the family was told the story behind the portrait, the story of the thunderstorm and the cowboy and the woman who had been brave enough to trust a stranger. And so the legacy lived on, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most powerful love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, in the midst of fear and uncertainty, when one person reaches out a hand to another and says, "I will keep you safe." Emma and James had saved each other that stormy night in 1882, and from that salvation had grown a love that transcended time, a family that spanned generations, and a story that would be told as long as there were Thorntons in Thornton Valley to tell it. The lightning might have frightened Emma that long-ago night, but it had also illuminated her path forward, leading her to the arms of a man who would love her unconditionally for the rest of their lives. And every time a storm rolled through the valley, the Thorntons would remember and be grateful, for it was in the midst of nature's fury that their family's greatest blessing had been born. The cowboy had found her trembling in a thunderstorm, and he had held her close until the lightning passed away. But the warmth and safety of that embrace had lasted a lifetime, and its effects would ripple forward through the generations. A never-ending testament to the power of love, courage, and the simple act of one human being offering shelter to another in their time of greatest need.